Hi, everybody. My name's Patricia Martucci, and I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. And I practice in New York, New Jersey, and virtually in California. So today I'm here to talk about attachment and attachment patterns and attachment trauma. In a very brief way, there's so much that we can say about attachment. And I'm here to talk about attachment, mostly early attachment with children and with parents. And something interesting that I find working as a family therapist is, coming more so from a systemic view, is that oftentimes the person that comes in with the problem, we would say the identified patient, is not necessarily the one that is causing the problems, or that the problems are, created really just within them, individually. Oftentimes it's a systemic issue. And what I find a lot of the time, especially with younger children, is that their attachment issues that they have, whether it's secure attachment, anxious attachment, avoidant attachment, disorganized attachment, I'm sure I'm forgetting some, but there's, depending on the model, there's so many different ways to view attachment. But oftentimes, their attachment pattern between a child or even a teenager, is the result of the system. And the anxious, or the person that's exhibiting, the most symptoms, is often the one that is, more sensitive and maybe more empathic, and the one that kind of holds all of the, let's say, dysfunction of the family system. So, I was watching a while back when I lived in Los Angeles. I was at a workshop, I think it was, or maybe it was the National Eating Disorder Association conference, and I was listening to a woman, Carolyn Costin, speak about her own experience, learning about attachment and a trauma that took place. I think it was early in her mom's life, and I don't want to get this wrong, it was so long ago. So I'm more going to talk about what I took away from that than the specifics of the trauma, but something that had happened in her mom's life. And her mom was getting re-traumatized by it when she was a little girl, and as a result, she had anxiety about going off to school. And it was an interesting thing for me to hear, especially because I had a similar situation myself as a child where, and I find it really interesting, actually, and I think it helps me really identify when this is going on within one of my clients, and really where to look and where to go, and oftentimes I've found in life or in therapy, it's like we can do something over here to help something over here. It's almost like I just learned in my recent somatic experiencing touch training that I was on, that if you have an injury on the right side of the body, you're oftentimes going to work with the left side. So in this case, my story in a nutshell was, I had severe, I guess you could say, separation anxiety when I was in kindergarten, and to the point where I would cry every time my mom would leave, and to the point where I remember different things where the principal would be with me in the bathroom just telling me, stop crying. She was a nun and I was scared of her, and that didn't really help too much. But I think my mom then eventually, if I remember correctly, had told me that they had like a mirror where she could sit on the other end of the mirror, and it was like a see-through mirror, and she would stay there until I felt settled. And so, it was interesting because I feel like there was a lot of attention put on me, as the child, and, what they needed to do to help me to feel comforted or safe, or, whatever it was that would help me to adjust better to being left. And, when I discovered some of these other perspectives looking back, and it's hard, you can't really specifically tell, from the moment in time we're in right now, really that accurately what happened in the past. It's all based on our memory and how we view and see things. But I do remember, and I got confirmation from my best friend, who is also she's a practicing social worker, that she remembers me and at that age crying every day, in school. And so what I later discovered was, and I kind of knew this, I think, in my body at the time, was that my mom was not well at the time and she was really struggling. I must have been about 5 years old, and that was around the time that my mom, found out some really traumatizing information about her marriage. And her marriage and the life that her and my dad had been building, was over really, and came to an abrupt stop. And this really, really impacted her in a huge way. And I do remember, my mom as a young girl crying a lot of the time, and not really being okay as much as she, had wanted to, and was, really struggling. I knew, I was always a sensitive little kid, and I knew that she wasn't okay. So part of me was afraid, and I feel this now sometimes too, in different ways, but afraid to leave her because I felt that she wasn't okay. And I felt like in order for me to be okay, she needed to be okay. And if I was around her all the time, then I could assure that she was okay. And leaving her to go to kindergarten, disabled me from being around her, as much as I felt comfortable to know that she was okay. So, I think with children, we have to, recognize and understand that most children are picking up on everything. We're very, as little ones, attuned to the world around us. And there's something called co-regulation, which means that children regulate through the parent's nervous system. And what that means is, I've worked with a lot of parents and a lot of children and a lot of teenagers, and what often happens when there's distress with a kid is that the child or the adolescent will come to therapy and the parents will be like, can you help my kid? But much of the time, it's, I think, a lot harder, for us, as adults or as parents to take the time really to look at our own stuff and like maybe what's contributing to the bigger picture of the situation. I think in a busy world that we have so much to do, it can be really hard to, really understand that taking the time for ourselves really will help our whole family system operate better. And working through our own anxiety, our own issues, our own relational disturbances is only going to provide a safer, more secure environment for a child to grow and thrive in, and to feel safe and good, and to trust, in that, and develop that secure attachment. So what happened in my situation was, I think I probably moved through it, but what I see happen a lot of the time, like I was saying, is that that the child comes in and the teenager comes in, and they come in sometimes down the road after the initial distress with like an eating disorder or addiction, which I work with pretty frequently, or they come in having other issues down the road. And and I think that if somebody comes in and they're, a kid or an adolescent, I'm really likely to work with the family and to support the parents and support the whole system in strengthening, so that the system can feel strong and secure and be a wonderful place for children and adolescents and young adults to thrive. And, when an adult comes in having come from a situation like this, oftentimes I don't work with the family. There are times where I will work with the family or one parent or a sibling, and we can bring them in as a support. But most of the time, they're either in their own, college experience by the time they get to me, or work environment if they're young adults. As older adults or middle-aged adults, they're oftentimes in their own relationships, and sometimes we'll work within that, because I think adult relationships can be a great source of healing our early attachment wounds that we have. So, and we can work with that in a couples dynamic. So I know that is a lot that I've said right now, and I do plan to do more videos on couples and those dynamics and how to work with attachment in a couple relationship, and whatever else seems like it could be helpful. So I'm really glad that I got to talk to you today about attachment, and I hope that this was helpful. Thank you. Thank you.